news. Tickets for the Conference on Religious Trauma, Court 2023, are now available. Also, if you're interested in an ad-free version of the Divorcing Religion podcast, come join me over on Patreon. Links for both are in the show notes. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious recovery consultant. Today's guest is troubled teen industry survivor and activist Brett Harper. Having survived a troubled teen industry program that left him with traumatic, lifelong injuries and disabilities, Brett has made it his purpose in life to raise awareness about child abuse in the troubled teen industry. Spare the Rod began as a hashtag, taking the biblical phrase often cited by abusive authoritarian adults to justify striking and abusing children. Brett uses the hashtag Spare the Rod as a call to action that challenges those in authority to lead with love, empathy, and compassion instead of with a heavy hand. Welcome, Brett. I'm glad you could join me today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We came in contact over Twitter. I think you were aware of some of the work I do around religious trauma recovery.
Yes.
And then I also was quite interested in the troubled teen industry. I really didn't know much about it. And I reached out to you and you pointed me to your website. And it's just amazing and horrifying, some of the abuses that happen. Oh, you got a kitty cat there.
Yeah, she hears me talking. Says, I want to be involved.
So cute.
This is Athena, yeah.
Athena, I love it. And so I'm hoping today that you'll tell us a little bit about your own experience in the troubled teen industry. And even prior to that, what was it like growing up in your household? I'm wondering if your parents were religious, because I know it's a lot of religious people who have interactions with the troubled teen industry.
Yeah, so my parents were very religious. They are of the Baptist variety. They are Trump supporters, your MAGA Republican variety of Baptist.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, so pretty extreme Christian, very sheltered growing up, and yeah.
Wow. And so, at what point did the troubled teen industry kind of enter your life? What happened?
So, when I was born into some troubling circumstances. My birth father murdered my mother when I was 6 months old. So
oh my gosh.
I was adopted by my aunt and uncle, which is Chris and Bill. So, I mean, there was some trauma there that really didn't get addressed. It started to come out in my teen years, and my parents, instead of knowing how to address that or reaching out for professional help, like through psychiatric help or a therapist or something, decided to go to the church for help and decided to start taking me to therapy sessions. But they were really just sessions with like a youth pastor or a pastor that told me how horrible I was and how I needed to obey my parents and listen and all of that stuff, right? And so you always felt ganged up on. It really didn't do anything. It just made things worse. And so eventually my dad brought me to his office one Saturday, and it was on a weekend, and he is a parole and probation officer, and his office is closed down obviously on the weekend. And so he said, we're going to come here, we're going to meet the counselor here. And it turns out it was a guy by the name of Mr. Smith. And Mr. Smith, Tim Smith, was the owner of a West Coast Academy, which was the first place they went to. It was a group home. And there was
how old were you, Brett?
I was 13 years old when that happened. Yeah. And so I had a couple of years there, 11, 12, where me and my dad weren't getting along. I think I had childhood PTSD, and I don't think it was addressed. And then my adopted dad, Bill, he had a real problem with anger and yelling, and he didn't really show softer sides of himself. And so I think what happened is I just started to amplify and reflect what I was experiencing from him. And I wasn't really feeling safe or accepted, especially since I was adopted as well. And it seemed like I was treated different than his naturally born kids. And so that really started to just come to a head around, between 11 and 13. And then eventually he sent me to this boys' home. And in the boys' home, there was a lot of different abuse that happened there, physical. There was some sexual abuse as well that I went through. It was there's a real shock, being away from home, not being safe. Your parents signed you up for this, and I didn't know I was going when we went to my dad's office. It was just like, hey, get in the truck with this guy.
Oh my
You're
gosh.
going home with him. And so I ended up going to the same school that I was going to before, the Christian school there, because the program was still in Prineville, Oregon. But I went from being the new kid that everybody kind of picked on and made fun of and stuff, because I had just moved there a year before, to starting to actually fight back against people that were my bullies and stuff. And I'd use language that I hadn't used before. I got in trouble. I got suspended twice, I believe, for language, or once for language and another time for a kid tried to remove a chair from underneath me when I was trying to change a light bulb, and I punched him in the face. And so, I mean, like I started becoming more aggressive, and the teachers noticed that. They noticed that I was coming to school with black and blue eyes.
Oh, dear.
And that was from the fighting in the boys' home, where there wasn't a lot of supervision, and the older kids were beating up on the younger ones, and there's just constant,
And were your parents interacting, checking in at all? Were they seeing? Did they know what was going on?
And that's something it's even more frustrating, and is that yes, they did. My dad, Bill, he came to my basketball practices, and so he saw me with black eyes.
Wow.
And when I tried to tell him what's going on, that some of the older boys were beating up on some of the younger boys, or that that the staff hit us, or some of the things that the sexual abuse and stuff, it was all ignored. And it was like he didn't believe me at all. And so even my teacher, like my math teacher, reached out to them, my parents, and told me that she reached out to them because she was concerned, because I was like falling asleep in class. I obviously wasn't getting good sleep because I was worried I'd get beat up in my sleep or different things. And so like they were concerned about me because I had really good grades before that. And so then eventually my dad pulled me out of that program because he found out that they snuck me into House on Haunted Hill, which is an R-rated movie.
Uh-oh.
So I guess like in his Christian Baptist world, like that was a bigger sin than the child abuse.
Wow.
The sex abuse was with Mrs. Smith, and it was, I mean, we all did chores, right? We took care of different animals. That seems to be a going theme in a lot of these places, is to have exotic animals and have kids take care of them. And so we had some fairly dangerous animals that kids probably shouldn't have. We had a bear cub that was in a cage. And for the first night, they stuck me in the bear cub and like tried to scare me, and, put me in the bear cub cage. And, just things like that. They had monkeys, which were interesting. They were in a cage. They got out one time and started getting into the razor blades and throwing them at us, which was fun to try and get them back. Yeah, they had some pretty interesting animals, right? They had a couple of blind dogs. And so we were doing chores, and I can't remember what my chores were that day, but I came back and I was tired, and I laid down and I was going to take a nap. And because back then, like at that place, like when we weren't doing chores and we weren't doing things, sometimes I was kind of depressed, and I'd just go to sleep or something, or I'd especially since I couldn't sleep well at night, sometimes I was worried I'd get like blanket partied or beat up. So I ended up going to sleep, and I woke up, and this woman, Mrs. Smith, is undoing my pants and trying to massage me down there. And so I jumped up, I ran out of the room. she screamed that if I said anything, I was a dead man and all this stuff, that nobody was going to believe me. And
Wow.
I didn't say anything to Mr. Smith because I was scared that he wouldn't believe me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was in an environment where I didn't feel safe and didn't feel like I could come forward. But after I got out of the program, I tried to talk to my dad about it. And he didn't believe me. He didn't listen to me about it. He just said that I made that up. And then he told me that he wouldn't send me to another program. But eventually, of course, he did send me to Agape boarding school in Missouri, which is the place I was in for almost 4 years, like 3.5 years. So the rest of my teen years, I was in there.
And I'm so sorry that happened to you. It just sounds like a nightmare. I really can't imagine being an adolescent.
Too fast and kind of like not let you ask questions. I'm sorry if that's the case, but it just, it kind of comes to me in spurts. But yeah, it was a really horrible experience. There's a lot more to it. I won't get into the details too much. I get into it in my book, definitely. Okay. Some of the stuff that happened, but
right.
But yeah.
Well, so your dad was a parole officer, I think you said, right? Or he was involved somehow.
Parole and probation officer, yes.
Right, and
for the
he
state
was
of Oregon.
Right, and so pretty. I'm guessing like rough around the edges. It doesn't sound like he was terribly empathetic when you were having trouble. You would think, okay, the infant survived. You as an infant survived something just terrible. And so of course there are going to be some psychological and emotional scars from that. But Christians, their answer is often circles back to the Bible. Everything has to relate to the Bible. And if you're going to get counseling, and I have my air quotes for people who are listening, right, it has to be through the church. And that is just, maintaining a closed loop or a sealed kind of group there. So then your dad sends you, without telling you where you're going, into a situation that ended up being abusive and terrifying. Yeah. He pulls you out because they took you to an R-rated movie, not because they were abusing you, promises you he won't do it again. And then again, at some later point in your teens, shuffles you off to a different troubled teen industry, home or school. Was it in a different state?
Yeah, this one was in Missouri. This one was in Stockton, Missouri. And
how old were you?
I was 14.
Okay. Yeah. And then what led up to this one? Did you at least have some warning this time, or you were just having arguments with him and so he sent you away?
He promised that he wouldn't send me off to another place like the last place because I ran away once because I was scared he would. Okay. But I'd overheard him talking to someone on the phone about it. And so I think I was overhearing like a dean at Agape or something. So I think his plan all along was to send me off for, my teen years. I think that they decided, they made the calculus that they just couldn't raise me, or they didn't want to anymore. And so they were going to use the trust fund that my mom and grandpa had given me in their murder and from life insurance money to basically have me tortured over there in Missouri. And then my dad he's an interesting, I call him my dad, but he's, my adopted dad, Bill. He worked for McLaren, which is a boys' prison before being a parole and probation officer. I did some digging and I found out that place has a lot of really troubling abuse history. And so he's been in this industry or around it for a while. And when I went to Agape, he started his own transport business, taking kids to places like Agape. He signed some deals with Agape to transport students there so that when they needed a student forcibly taken there, they would call my dad. My dad would hire off-duty police officers. He worked with Julio at one point in time. Julio was recently in the news. for taking somebody from California. An estranged mother had her son taken to Agape, even though she didn't have custody. She just had them do that. And so
Wow.
so that sparked a whole thing and like got people's attention about how people are taken to these places sometimes. And so he basically just he had me transported. I came home one day and my mom had left, everybody else had left. It was just me and my dad, and
Mhm.
two transport agents came out of my bathroom and said, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way."
Oh.
And I said, "Well, you know what? I'll just do the easy way," because I'd tried to run away before, and we lived out in the country, so it's impossible. Like it would have taken 20 minutes by car to get into town. So if you're running away on foot, you know what I mean? You're in the middle of nowhere. It's high desert. There's nowhere to really run. And your dad's a parole probation officer that has all the friends, local law enforcement on side. So, you just know that there's nowhere to go. You know what I mean? So I just was like, okay, you got me,
Terrifying.
And so,
yeah. So then they, I hope they didn't handcuff you. Perhaps not, because you were going willingly.
they did it first after they let me change, and then they handcuffed me.
Oh my God.
And shackled my legs and put me in the van, and then drove me to the airport. And then they said, "Look, here's what we'll do. We'll give you a leg brace, because you can't shackle somebody and bring them through an airplane."
Yeah.
And so what they do, and this is important because I believe this is kind of illegal, but they give kids leg braces or things like that will make them less mobile, so they can't really run.
Right.
And then they have them wear those, and if they'll cooperate, they'll take them on a plane. If not, then they drive them on like a van or something. And that's what they told me straight up. They said, "Look, if you want to make this easier on yourself, then we need to take the plane, because if you don't do that, you're going to be stuck in a van with us for a couple of days as we travel across country." And so I just took the easy route.
How terrifying. I can't even imagine. You don't even feel like you can ask anyone in the airport for help, because these two, I'm going to say goons, these two men are treating you, as a criminal and transporting you without your permission, even out of the state.
But it felt like property.
Terrible.
Because they sign a form. So my dad signed a form in front of me, and then that same piece of paper was signed by Agape when I got there. So I mean, it's like it was like transferring property, which, so that's how that felt. But
it just is very reminiscent of trafficking. When we think of human trafficking, that's what this feels like to
slavery,
me.
trafficking, you know what I mean? Sex trafficking, all of that is very similar in how they do that.
Wow. So you get on the plane and you fly to this new place. What's it like when you get there? Does it feel like the other place? I mean, you must be in high alert mode. You have no idea if it's going to be abuse going on.
When I first got there, I was told that it was going to be a co-ed place with like a nice swimming pool, and I was going to love it and not want to go home. And of course, all that was a lie, right? And they were, I don't know why the transport agents told me these lies. Maybe just they were worried I would, I was 6'2" back then and in sixth grade. So maybe they were worried I would try to freak out or maybe be a problem for them. But when I got there, I realized that things were really not what I've been told. That I've been sold a bill of goods. So basically, the first thing I noticed is I had Vanderkoy. We called everybody brother or whatever too. That was like that weird, thing that they do, brother Vanderkoy. But Brother Vanderkoy was like this big Marine guy that was ex-Marines. And he did the boot camp when you got in there and the intake when I was there. And I remember them going through my stuff and they were throwing this out and throwing, you can't have this, you can't have that, throwing it in a trash bag. And I thought they were just throwing it away. And so it's like really was like really abrasive. I'm like, what do you do with my stuff? And then
Mhm.
I don't remember what I said. That's all I remember of what I said. I might have said something more, but I ended up catching a backhand from Vanderkoy across the temple that knocked me
Oh,
to the ground and nearly knocked me out cold.
wow.
I had to struggle to get back up and regain my balance. And so then he's like, that's the owner. Don't ever talk to him like that. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I talk about in my book, like I realized I'm not safe. I'm in an unsafe environment with strangers I don't know. And I better be quiet and just fly under the radar as much as I can, because these people, they don't care. They're dangerous. You know what I mean? And so I ended up, getting dressed and going to boot camp, and it was football camp. So a lot of the kids were gone. And I remember there was this other kid that was in boot camp that was like shaking and like sweating and like having a hard time. And I was like, what's wrong with him? And somebody's like, he's coming down off of heroin. And I was like, what's that? Like at that point, I was so sheltered that at 14, putting me in agape was actually how I learned about drugs.
Wow.
And I
Mm-hmm.
learned about drugs by watching somebody come down and probably almost die from coming down without assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And they would rip kids off of certain meds, and you'd watch them go through that kind of similar withdrawal process,
Wow.
because they believed that a lot of these ADHD things, autism, they believe that's all made up, right? They think the kids, like you said, they believe it's all, you go to the church for this stuff instead of professionals. So the church tells them, oh, your kid just needs to go work a job or something. He's just not busy enough, idle hands of the devil's workshop or whatever. And so then this is the idea to the kids, they send them some boarding school where they do hard labor, and now that'll teach them,
Well,
what I
yeah.
mean? And then they
Yeah.
end up being these child slaves. I mean, it got me. We broke horses. So I didn't personally, but people broke horses. The animal thing was like scaled up even. We had water buffalo, we had sheep, we had different types of animals, emus, all kinds of animals that were there. And so I'm sure they made money off of livestock. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And when I looked at it recently, it looks like they did it all under nonprofit, which
Oh,
means that, yeah, it's all slimy and yeah.
wow. So, so how long were you at Agape, and what was your education like while you were there? Were they schooling you there? Were they sending you off site to a Christian school?
The school is there. So when you get there in boot camp, you have a couple weeks to a couple months, depending on how hard it is to quote unquote break you. Once
Mm.
they figure that they've broken you and you'll submit, then they let you out of boot camp. So if you want out of boot camp faster, you just do what they say. And if you are obstinate, which some kids are, then you could be in there for a while. While you're in there, you're on a buddy system. So you're 3 feet from somebody that's teaching you the rules. And once you get out of boot camp, you can start school, but you can go right back into it if you start to misbehave or don't follow the rules or don't listen to your buddy. So you have like a tiered system. There's a yellow shirt, and then you would go to a burgundy shirt as a regular student. Once you're a burgundy shirt, you don't have to be around anybody or listen to anybody else, and you're in school and you've been there for a minute. But yeah, so there's this little bit of a transition. During boot camp, you work, you clean up trash, built houses, laid foundations, drywall,
At 14 years old?
insulation, yeah, all that stuff.
Wow. And so how long was boot camp?
Well, like I said, boot camp could go anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple months, depending on how long they felt you needed before you were going to be submissive and they had broken your will.
And how would they break someone's will?
Well, like I said, a lot of this hard labor stuff was pretty hard. At 14 years old, we really shouldn't have been building houses, but and they didn't have contractors really doing the work. It was us doing it. Like we were putting the foundation in, we were putting the insulation in. You know what I mean? They would tell us how to do it, but we would do the work.
And was there
And
deprivation? Like, were you getting adequate sleep, adequate food, or were you just working all the time and not
working a
having?
lot, but
Mhm.
also they had 45-minute PTs or physical training sessions in the morning and the afternoons. And sometimes those would get doubled or tripled if kids didn't keep up running, or somebody was in a bad mood, or, you know what I mean? Like there's all kinds of, there's a video out of a kid getting kicked by the pastor, Burton, in the back as he's running, and then falling on his face and then getting picked back up and then making him run again and then kicking him in the back and keep doing that
Oh,
around circles. And that's how boot camp was, right? I got kicked uh, in the side a lot. People would say all kinds of stuff I won't repeat, just really derogatory stuff to you, and then kick you and try to push you. And it was like being in the military, like being in boot camp. And so it was really tough. I remember the first night I broke down, and I was like, even in jail, I would get a phone call, and they were like, you don't get to call your parents except for once a, they call you once a week or whatever, and it's monitored. And the kids there, like, don't say anything. Otherwise, if you say anything about what's going on, you're going to get in even more trouble. And so you can't write home because all your letters are censored. So when you write, you have to write that everything's fine, and you're a hostage, essentially. It's like,
yeah.
it's like what it feels like. And so like then uh you get to do school like eventually, but they do take people out on work crews randomly to go do work crews for, like, oh, we'll decide that we're going to go ahead and take you out on a work crew today. Then you don't get to do school that day. And so there is some of that where it's like, they do let you do school, but they also make you work. And then if they feel like it, they can throw you back into boot camp at any point in time and make you start that whole process all over again. So there are disruptions that happen in your schooling because of that. We had a F4 tornado that we survived. So we rebuilt the school. That was
Oh my
lovely.
gosh.
So yeah, so we rebuilt it literally, like we were cleaning up all the debris, and then they had us out into the town cleaning up debris for the town and disaster relief. That was, yeah. So anyway, so sometimes they would have us boys do work crews for people in town. And I don't know if they got paid for these things or if they got traded favors or favor with the town, is obvious, because the town, later we found out that people were like, why are you trying to shut down the school, to one of the local town people that was speaking up. Don't you need their help, like getting groceries or moving stuff or doing any work on your property? Don't you
Wow.
know that they provide a lot of jobs for people around here? And so like it became like this cult town, Stockton did, where literally like everybody was in on it. Everybody knew about this dirty secret, but everybody was benefiting from it. And
Wow.
because we tried to alert the town people, because that's what our idea was, people just know what's going on. Surely they'll stand up, you know what I mean, and say, not in our town.
Mhm.
But that's not what happened. Like everybody turned on that one person that spoke up, and they like started to follow her around and sit outside her house and like and everything. So this is recent, like trying to jump around the timeline here, but this is more recently, and they like went and harassed her autistic brother at the grocery store. There's only like one grocery store there, and he worked
Mhm.
there. And so just there was a lot of hooks that people had in things, you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
because of that. The doctor, for example, Dr. Smock was in the news a lot. When I needed to go to the doctor, I was only taken to that doctor, and that doctor later was charged with child abuse.
Oh.
And he was actually, apparently, before all this, was in trouble in California and Arizona for sex abuse against boys. So the fact that he got mixed up with, he married into the family, he married into the Clemenson family. He's married to one of the daughters of Mr. Clemenson. And so So you see, it's all just a big happy cult family. Like they send you to the doctor, you tell you. So I tried to tell the doctor, hey, my back hurts. They're having me do all this hard work. And he told me to shut up if I knew it was good for me. I wonder how that's working out for him now. But,
Wow.
it's like, but we had to go through a lot to get him in jail. And even after we put him in jail, he retained his medical license. He was sitting in jail, and I called the medical board for Missouri. Like, why does this man still have a license to practice medicine? And he has his own practice. So potentially he could get out and just start seeing kids again.
Wow. Unbelievable.
And so I was like, yeah, you guys need to do something about that. And like, I don't know that they ever did, to be honest. Like, but I had to fight so much corruption in Missouri that it's absolutely insane. I mean,
wow.
Yeah.
And so in my introduction, I mentioned, because I took it from your website, lifelong injuries and disabilities. Do these relate to the hard manual labor at 14 years old that you were forced to do?
I do believe so. I mean, it's something I've gone over with doctors for many years. I have a fissure disc in my L5S1 region. So what it means is that a fissure disc is like a disc is like a gelatin. So it rips, it doesn't, it's like tears, And when that happens, the fluid drips out and it gets onto it inflames around the nerve root. Wow. The sciatic nerve runs the longest running nerve in your body. So it runs all the way from like your hip all the way down to your toes. And so this left leg constantly has pain in it. Even now when we're talking, I have pain in it just sitting here. And so if I sit for too long, it's painful. If I stand for too long, it's painful. You have to kind of keep moving. You also have to stretch a lot. Right. And it can flare up to where you can't do anything really.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So it's debilitating.
It is very debilitating. Sciatica in the extreme that I have it is very debilitating. I'm starting to get some pain. It's radiating down my left arm. I've gotten some sciatic just starting into my right leg, which means that my sciatica is getting a little worse. I've had 2 back surgeries. So I went through chiropractic. I went through massage. I went through acupuncture. I tried ultrasound treatment. I tried everything you can think of, and because they want you to try all that physical therapy, you know what I mean? And nothing worked. And so I got the first surgery back in, I believe, 2020. And then I had another one here a year after that.
And you're young. Are you even 30? You're just
I'm 37. Thank you. I'll take that compliment. I am still, I like to think I'm still young. But yeah, so I am young. And so that is a concern. They didn't really want to do the surgery because I'm so young. And we weren't sure if we were going to have to do an artificial disc, and those break down over time. Right. And so I'm too young for that. Like it would break down and I'd have to get replaced, and that would be, so we ended up they did a laminectomy discectomy where they take out part of the lamina so that there's more room around the nerve root. But what that means is I have to watch my diet. I can't eat a lot of sugar. I can't eat a lot of things that cause inflammation.
Exactly.
In the winter time, when the barometric pressure drops and changes and stuff, that I can feel that in my lower spine.
Wow. Oh my God. That's like a senior citizen when they can tell that there's a change in the weather coming.
I can tell you when it's going to rain.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's weird and it sucks. I've got some ankle pain as well that's starting to happen, and she's getting more severe. So I think I've talked to other kids that have gone there. They have elbow, ankle, knee pain. There's some other injuries and things like that. And so I just think it's just hard labor, I think.
Right. Yeah. And is the school still operating?
No. Thankfully, we shut them down.
Excellent.
They did rebrand though.
Mm.
So it's essentially like they're still operating, but they're small. They're a group home now. It's just, I think, like 30 or 40 people. I'm not even sure that they're that many people, but what happened? So for years, we tried to get Agape exposed. I remember back in 2003 when I got out, there was a few years of not really, because you don't really realize what happened to you right away, usually.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people think that people should come out with their stories right away, but they don't understand why people come out with their stories 10, 20 years later. It's because some of this stuff is really hard to talk about and it doesn't quite come up. And some people don't even realize it's so normalized. The abuse is so normalized that we don't even really realize how bad it was until later. And so when I got out, I didn't really realize at first, but after about 2 years, my back wasn't getting any better. It was getting worse, and it was getting severely worse. And it was to the point where I had to drop out of college. And I had started going to college. I walked onto the basketball team, and then boom, back just got so bad that I couldn't play basketball, and I was really good at basketball. And so that was heartbreaking, and it was a reality check for me. It was like, hey, something happened to you there, because this isn't normal to be 18 years old and be in this much pain.
Right.
And so then I tried to get support from my family, who just told me, oh, these things happen, because they didn't want to take responsibility for whatever they did. So they're just like, you just need to go to physical therapy, and like, you can work, and, and so there wasn't a whole lot of real support there. I ended up trying to speak out about what I was going through in some Yahoo groups back in the day, because that's all we had back then. And the Yahoo groups, guys just made fun of me because, the whole male stigma or toxic masculinity thing, as soon as you start talking to other guys about abuse, the macho response is, oh, it wasn't that bad. You know what I mean? Like, or like, oh, or like, we're lucky. It could have been worse. And like those kinds of like almost Stockholm like syndrome phrases come out of people. And if you're not careful, they'll get really angry with you because you're trying to get them to focus on something that is traumatic for them. And they don't want to. And so I ended up pissing some of them off because I just kept trying to get them to speak up about, like, hey, no, really, I think that there's something wrong with my back. And I think that what we went through wasn't okay. And I've been reading. And so finally I gave up. I said, you know what, I guess there's nothing I can do, because I didn't have the kind of supportive family that should have been like, no, we're going to sue. You know what I mean? Or something that would have been huge, but I didn't have that. I had a dad that was working in the industry, transporting kids to Agape still, even after I was gone. And I'm telling him, hey, my back's broken, the stuff's going on, and he's still taking kids there.
Wow. Yes.
And so that eventually ended our relationship. I can no longer speak to this man because I told him flat out, you're bringing kids into an abusive industry. And he's like, but I didn't send them there. The parents sent them so I don't have any control over a parent. You are still part of the chain.
Yes. Did he ever apologize for sending you there? Did he ever acknowledge that, yeah, it was wrong to do?
No, not a sincere apology. No. He apologized for the boys' home. And there was some kind of like denial that I ever brought up the sex abuse that happened there or the physical abuse that happened there. But I did. But, of course, he denied that. Well, you never told me about that. I did. You know what I mean? But now he regrets the first place, because there was actually some incidents that happened after that first place too with Tim, where Tim Smith ended up beating up some boys or something. And he ended up having to run to Mexico to try and get away from authorities. And my dad, being a parole and probation officer, people at work asked him about this guy. Like, hey, didn't you put your kid in the care with this guy? So it was like really embarrassing for him. And so that he actually does, I think, care about that one. But I think he only cares about it because it was embarrassing for him personally.
Right.
I don't think he cared about any of the other, because the Agape thing, I've shown him news articles. I've shown him pictures of my back, told him I told my mom SSD even, like which happened more recently. He wouldn't look at the articles. He would make excuses. Oh, I have slow internet. Just stupid things. And you're like, okay. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, now agape, the name is a Christian name, well, a Greek name, but that the Christians use. And so was Christianity, were they quoting the Bible? Did you have Bible study? Was there religious stuff going on while you were in that agape
Yes,
place?
Agape was a independent fundamental Baptist organization or church. So it descends from the Lester Roloff group, which the Roloff homes, and I'm sure you've heard about some of that. They actually had pictures of Roloff up, and they had a dorm, Roloff dorm. They had a Bucky Tucker dorm and a Roloff dorm and a Hiles dorm and so like Hiles Anderson and some of those other firebrand preachers and stuff, they practically worship these people. They would play us some of their sermons. They would have guest speakers that were a lot like them come and speak, and the preachers there spoke like that a lot.
Which is to say hellfire and brimstone and terrifying anyone who's listening.
Yes, God is a terrifying God, and he is angry all the time. You know what I mean? Yeah. Very, very seldom does they talk about God's love, and usually as a way to convince you that you want to work for the church or become part of something bigger than yourself or whatever.
Right.
And so they constantly tried to get kids in the school to commit to a life of service or go to Bible college or go to the military.
Right. Indoctrination.
Or, indoctrination. The military, I didn't realize that was more of a subtle indoctrination. I didn't realize why they do that till later. And then I realized that because it'll have some of the same stern morals and stuff, it'll tend to like keep them locked in their
in an authoritarian system.
Yeah. And so it's an authoritarian system to another authoritarian system. And the longer you can keep someone in there, especially their young adult years, the less likely they're going to open up to, hey, maybe this isn't right. You know what I mean? Like, maybe it's just heavy-headed. Maybe we should treat kids differently. Like, they don't want you. And then the longer you get that brain rigidity, then you're more likely to become one of them. And so it's something else. They would show us old war reels. This is why we fight from like World War II, the really brainwashy ones.
Wow. Yeah. And that's so trippy considering what's going on in the United States right now, where we see a resurgence of fascism. It's just...
Well, that was around 9/11 too. So when I watched the towers fall in the school, which was also kind of terrifying. Your country's under attack. You're in a weird place with people that are abusing you. You know what I mean? And the only news that you can get is the stuff that's drip fed to you from Fox News.
Oh, God.
So they play football and they cut out the commercials and they play Fox News on loop. And they would play This Is Why We Fight and like Hiles Anderson and just super Christian nationalist, Christian fascist, Christian brainwash stuff. And a lot of them are ex-military. Like, there's a lot of MK Ultra type feel to the whole thing. It's really weird. A lot of like, and I've actually found out later some of the tactics that they used to like break people's will are straight from the MK Ultra playbook. And so I was just like, holy crap, these people are using like torture techniques. They put people on a wall, right? And have you stare at a wall. And I don't think people realize like how messed up that is after a while. It starts to mess with your head. And they stick kids on there for a month.
Oh, wow.
It'd be like every free time they're on that wall looking at that, and then they wouldn't let them sit down, so they'd be standing for hours at a time.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So, and they would do things that were pretty
beyond questionable. and were there females there? Were there girls at the school and the home as well?
So there were staff wives and staff daughters. There were at the time I was there was not boys and girls. They tried to do that at one point. with the girls, and then they stopped. And then, but there was a sister school next door that was called what was it called? Refuge of Grace. And then it changed its name because they needed to rebrand, of course, because it doesn't take them long. Usually 5-10 years they get caught with some abuse, and then they have to rebrand. But so they rebranded. We eventually got them to shut down. My concern was it was almost like they could just breed cult people that way. They could have the girls, graduate here, the guys graduate and hook them up, and then have happy little cult families.
Wow.
But they already did that with students. Like they tried to hook me up with his daughter, tried to get me to stay on staff and said maybe she'd be interested in me.
Wow.
So there's this thing that happens with these staff families where you're not supposed to look at the staff girls. You're not supposed to, you can get in trouble for even looking in the general direction, but they groom certain kids. Robert Graves stayed on and married one of the daughters of, and stayed on and married his daughter. And then that they ended up getting divorced, and she ended up marrying another guy that got out of this, another student that got out of the program. So, and then there was talk Anna Cleveland was sleeping with some guy that was still incarcerated, some boy that was still incarcerated in the freezer, and that got out. So there's lots of like this kind of grooming sexual abuse stuff that's going on that nobody's doing anything about. I'm sure that there was other sex abuse stuff that was going on. I heard some rumors about stuff. I had an incident that's kind of fuzzy. I don't remember a kid forcing me to do oral in the shower. So it's really fuzzy. So it's almost like a dream, but it's there. And there's other kids that remember similar things happening from staff or other students. Lack of just a lack of ability to control that stuff, I guess.
Can you just quickly tell us what the freezer means? You said someone was in the freezer, and then how did you get the school closed down? And then about the advocacy work that you're doing now. So first of all, what's the freezer for people who don't know?
Well, the freezer is there's a kitchen. So I worked in the kitchen and helped prepare meals. And this happened after I left, but I heard about it. And I've had some other people, there were some other incidents, like so ended up having sex with one of the staff girls after he graduated in the chapel. So, there was numerous different things going on here, but the freezer was in the kitchen there. So I guess they figured they could sneak in there, fool around, and some people saw it.
I see.
But nobody did anything.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. And then how did you end up getting the Agape school, boarding school shut down?
That was difficult. That was very difficult. So I started trying to report it to the Cedar County Sheriff's Department back in 2017, 18. I think it was 2018 again. So I tried before in 2004 or 5 when my back wasn't getting any better. And when I called the authorities, they said that they had already looked into Agape. They weren't going to do anything more. And so, but what I found out later was that his daughter worked dispatch for the Cedar County Sheriff's Department. So a Clemenson is working dispatch. And then I realized that worked as a deputy there and he worked on the Cedar County Sheriff's Department and for Agape. And I found out there's 3 of them that worked for the Cedar County Sheriff's Department and Agape. Wow. And I did a records request from AG Eric at the time, and I asked, and he blocked it for a while, but eventually got it. And it looks like they just buried my complaints. Every time I called or somebody else called about abuse going on at Agape, they just note it really quick, and then it just doesn't go anywhere. They don't investigate it, they put closed investigation, and then just bury it. And so eventually we got the Kansas City Star to bring that up and say, people keep burying this. And so then the highway patrol was like, hey, wait a second, we've had runaways that come and say that they're being abused over there, and then we have to return them. But this school is it's not registered as a school anywhere. And why do we keep having this problem? So we really pushed the legislature, Carrie Engel and them, to work on a bill to address that, to make them at least do background checks on people, make them register with the state if they're going to open a residential care facility.
Good.
Those kinds of things. So eventually we did pass that. And there was, of course, Agape didn't want to comply with that. And there were some other places that sued over that and are trying to overturn that. And I believe that they actually passed a law this year that undoes the background checks, amazingly. I don't know why you would undo background checks for children,
Wow.
but, for people that are taking care of children, that just seems like common sense. But yeah, so, and it was by Rudy, the Republican that co-sponsored the bill. So they're undoing everything that we did. Mm-hmm. The only way we got Agape shut down is we just kept putting it in the news. Yeah. We just kept going on YouTube and kept going on Twitter and Facebook and TikTok and YouTube. The Hammer podcast has tons and tons of interviews with us. The Kansas City Star, interview after interview. The Rolling Stone, even. So we just kept getting interviews and we kept putting it in there. And eventually, and even admitted, he said, we can't get enough students to stay open. We can't afford to stay open. And so they shut down. So we shut the place down by word of mouth.
Excellent. Wow. I really appreciate your determination and tenacity to try and prevent the abuse from happening to others. And now you are an advocate for survivors of the troubled teen industry, and really continuing to blow the whistle and alert people that this is going on. And it's also a money-making racket. I mean, Bill is getting paid to transport people, essentially to kidnap children and adolescents against their will and move them to whatever Christian kind of facility they're taking them to.
Personally, it's almost like a RICO thing in Missouri. It's so bad because the corruption is so bad. It would take us a whole session to go over the corruption. But so the Missouri Highway Patrol said, we'll go ahead and investigate, and they did. And they were asked by the governor, Mike Parsons, to have Eric Schmidt, who was the AG, assist. Eric wanted to bring some 60 charges. He wanted to bring a lot more charges against these individuals, or so he says. But local law says that only a local prosecutor could prosecute. And so Ty Gaither came along, and Ty is friends with them, with the defense. We brought this up to the Board of Ethics. I did. I filed an official complaint, and I didn't hear anything back. This was in the news that he was out saying that he had been to the church, he had seen the boys, he'd hung out with them, that he knew the Clemensons, that he didn't think that their form of punishment was abuse, that he thought that this was, parents had a right to send their kids to places like this. He said all this openly before even the trials. Wow. And what we were dealing with is several people that were accused of like sexual assault and like physical assaults and things. Eventually people did get misdemeanors, but I think what he did was he charged so low that they could be brought down to misdemeanors so that they could get underneath our background checks, because our background checks were set up. I didn't like this, but I kind of got pushed out of the negotiating of the bill because I was considered too extreme. But they watered down the bill a little bit. And long story short, Agape has rebranded into something called Stone of Help, which is now there, and it's run by the football coach that worked there for 13 years, and he owned a piece of property 0.2 miles down the road. So they're rebranded into like a group home. They're not as big, but I don't know that the laws and things that we did are really going to be that effective, because it seems like we're going the opposite direction now, especially when it comes to education. So, I mean, it's now I worry with the Supreme Court's decision, maybe tax dollars could be used to send kids to places like this.
It's very, very concerning. Tell us about your book or books.
Okay. Oh, yes. Sorry. So Spare the Rod, A Troubling Look into the Troubled Teen Industry is my first book. And I released that last year. It has my story of, what I went through, what we went over today with a little bit more detail. It talks about some of the schools, some of the history behind the schools, how they connect, especially the Christian connection there with the IFB and stuff. So that's that first book, and it talks a little bit about like what we can do to combat that, and how, like what you said, I took the name Spare the Rod because honestly, it's a misinterpretation of scripture. It doesn't say spare the rod, spoil the child directly. What it says is that if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. And it talks, but the rod is it's a parable. It's talking about instructing someone, and it got misinterpreted, the Greek and the Hebrew, and to this idea that we have to be heavy-handed and beat people with rods, or punish them harshly. And I just don't think that that's the case. It says in another verse, instruct a child in the way that he should go, and when he's older, he won't depart from it. And I think we focus so much on the punishment aspect, we're not giving them good instruction. Why we don't do things. You know what I mean? Growing up, I was always like, I was not allowed to ask why.
Yeah.
And I think that's a mistake, because then when you get old enough where you need that answer for your own conscience sake, like why I don't do things, you don't have it. So you start to question everything that you were taught. And so the second book is because of the Supreme Court decision that allows tax dollars to be used in private schools, and the way that books are being burned and banned, and libraries are now under threat, and we have Nazis marching in the street, and it's all related.
And what's the second book called?
The second book is called Spare the Rod, The War Rages On. And it's more about the overall fight against Christian fascism, Christian nationalism, and this kind of wave to try and indoctrinate the kids. Because right now, I think that the far right is in their death throes. Essentially, they know that Gen Z and millennials are not really on board, and so they're trying to raise the voting age. That's not going to happen. They know this, so they're frantically trying to figure out what they can do. And so the tax thing for private schools is parents' way of keeping their kids in private schools, and they're trying to push them to keep them indoctrinated. But then also they're going after the public schools, removing things out of it that could challenge their views, watering things, history down, whitewashing it.
Right.
And then if they can't, they just destroy the school. They just defund it.
Right.
And in that way, you can only go to wherever rich people have put private schools.
Yes. I see it all going on. And how can people get in touch with you or find out more about you?
SpareTheRodNP.com, SpareTheRodNP for not-for-profit.com. So SpareTheRodNP.com is my main site. Okay. On Twitter, it's at SpareTheRodHQ. Very active on Twitter. Facebook, it's the Spare the Rod Revolution. So it's a page on Facebook. It's called the Spare the Rod Revolution. And I don't do as much on Facebook. I'm mostly on Twitter, mostly on my website, mostly on that, and looking into other ways to get the message out. TikTok, I have some videos up. Mastodon, like we talked about.
Right.
I think I have a page, but it's hard to connect with people there.
Okay. Yes. Wow. And so you remain active, trying to just sound the alarm about this. Did you also have a connection to related to exposing police brutality? Was that your website or anything that you're connected with?
Yeah. So I've got at Spare the Baton is a Twitter that I retweet police brutality, police mass incarceration talks around that kind of thing, because it all ties in.
It really does.
There's also the school to prison pipeline, which I think is really important to discuss, especially when we're talking about juveniles and how if they get locked up as a youth, they're more likely to get locked up as an adult, and
right.
how we can try to interrupt that process and make sure they don't get stuck in the system forever.
Wow.
I have been beat up by cops a few times. Unfortunately, I have CPTSD, and there's been a few times where I've been triggered and in a situation where I was misread. And so I've been pretty beat up by cops a couple of times. And so I think, I know I'm white and everything, but it really woke me up.
Yeah.
It was like,
exactly.
Oh, wow, people of color have this really bad. And this sucks. I don't, so I try to talk about it. And then also, I think I really do feel like it's related in the sense, because if you look back into history, which I get into the second book, police were slave patrols.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of the gooning aspect that we talked about with kids, runaway kids, other things, or going to transport a kid to a program. They sometimes use cops that are off duty or on. Like my dad used to hire off-duty cops. So there's no accountability when you do that, because then anything can happen in that transport, and it's your word versus the cops.
Well, yeah.
So there's a connection there.
The
fascism connects.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for what you do, for speaking out, for sharing your story, which is even, painful to listen to and to read, but I think is very, very important. And the rise of Christian nationalism that we're seeing definitely also ties into this. Brett, I really appreciate what you're doing, and I'm glad to help out any way I can with lending publicity. Did you have anything else that you wanted to say? We're just about at the end of our time today.
No, I just want to say to all the LGBTQ people that out there that are going through all this hate and all of this discrimination, that there are people out there like me that love you and are allies, and that, for those that have gone to Christian boarding schools or things that have been abusive, and they see these Christian nationalists and this rise of it's triggering for us. And so just stay strong, keep speaking out. We got to do this together. We got to stick together in this and fight back, because we're all in this together. We have a common enemy, and that is this Christian fascism. And I'm not even, there's Christians that even are allied with me against this Christian fascism, because they realize it's bad for their religion. It's bad for them and their community. And so I will ally myself with anybody that is willing to stand up against this hate.
Okay. Wow. Beautiful. Thank you. And as a member of the LGBTQ community, I thank you also for that encouragement. And I want to thank all our viewers and listeners for tuning in to this episode. I'll have information in the show notes again about how you can reach out to Brett and possibly how you can help this movement that he's started and a part of. And of course, you can go to my website, divorcing-religion.com, if you're looking for help on your own deconstruction journey. Thanks, everyone. Do take care. Thanks again, Brett.
Thank you.